ටින් වෙළඳපොලේ අඩුම මිලකට රුපියල් 199යි.
Tonight, one voice. Protesters continue for the 7th day as more crowds turn up to demand the government's resignation. No can do. Finance Minister Ali Sabri says that despite protesters' demands, the constitution reigns supreme.
And we went to the Supreme Court and 7 judges of the Supreme Court said you can't act outside the constitution. Here they are, the same group is demanding that the Prime President and the Prime Minister should step down.
Cash transport. Sri Lankan Airlines offers an explanation on the infamous Ugandan charter flights last year. From the ground up. Former central banker Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena says the IMF alone can't help Sri Lanka without institutional reforms.
And that value system will be a corruption-free society where the rule of law will be observed, everybody will be under the same law, law and order should be maintained without fear or favor, and the judiciary should be independent.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Friday, the 15th of April, 2022.
Nelly මතකෙන් ගිලිහුණු black shiny කෙස් කලඹක රහස sunsilk black shine සමගින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, bringing you the latest from across the island. This is First at 9 and I'm David Ebert. Now, for the 7th consecutive day, calls for the President and the government to resign have resounded outside the Presidential Secretariat on Golfers Green. The protest seems to have attracted more crowds, with no signs of dying down so far. Prior to last Saturday, the Golfers Green only attracted crowds to observe the beauty of the Colombo city and to spend time with their family members by the seaside. However, things have changed in the past week. Today, the Golfers Green remains the stage for thousands of young and old Sri Lankans echoing one common call for the President and the government to resign immediately over their failure to handle the economic crisis. Heading into its 7th day, the demonstration seems to be one that looks to break all Sri Lankan records for public protests. Thousands more have continued to man the barricades in front of the Presidential Secretariat, with others having pitched their tents at Colombo's latest mini-settlement named Gota Gogama. The demonstrations have now attracted people from all walks of life, including artists and sportsmen as well. Protesters continue to call on members of the public at home to join them and help sustain the anti-government demonstrations further. With today marking Good Friday, former Sri Lankan Test cricketer Dhammika Prasad arrived at the protest site to begin a 24-hour hunger strike. His demonstration is to call on the government to deliver justice to those who lost their lives during the Easter Sunday attacks that occurred 3 years ago and to support the ongoing anti-government demonstrations. Meanwhile, an individual who had been identified as a participant at several pro-government protests organized in the past few days was asked to leave the Golfers Green by a crowd of protesters. The individual who was engaged in selling food to anti-government protesters was questioned about his motives for being amongst the crowds, and once his identity had been confirmed, was ejected from the site without any incident. The protesters had expressed concerns over his activities and urged the police at the site to ask him to leave, citing the safety of protesters with a known pro-government supporter selling food items to them. Meanwhile, outside Colombo, several more anti-government demonstrations were held. Now, Finance Minister Ali Sabri says that despite protester demands that the President and the government step down, the constitution of the country has to be followed to the letter. Speaking to Indivari Angwatta on our current affairs program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24 yesterday, Sabri added that the dissolution of Parliament cannot be called for
even if the opposition's no confidence motion goes through.
It's now day 5 of the Golf Face Green Go Home, Go Ta campaign, the protest, and the Prime Minister has expressed willingness to engage with the protesters and to listen to their demands, what these demands are. Does it mean the government is still unclear of what they want and what they're demanding for?
Yes, there is a lack of clarity on that. You know, so you need to understand we have a constitution in this country. That's the supreme law of the country. Anything that we do should be in terms of the constitution. No, you can't just throw the constitution away. We have seen wherever the constitution has been broken, what has happened. And 2 years ago in 2018, you remember, the same people who have been fighting to safeguard the constitution, protect the constitution, and we went to the Supreme Court, and 7 judges of the Supreme Court said you can't act outside the constitution in terms of appointing prime minister or the cabinet and all those things. Here they are, the same group is demanding that the president who had been elected for 5 years should immediately step down. Prime President and the Prime Minister should step down, and the entirety of the cabinet and the 225 also step down. That seems to be their demand. I don't know that's the right approach, because then where is the government? Who's going to run? What is the next step?
If I may ask you a few questions on the legality and constitutionality of it, especially because you're an expert in this. What really is possible?
No, basically 2 things are possible. Up until 2.5 years of the term, even president cannot dissolve the parliament in terms of the 20th amendment. If the people in the parliament, including the opposition, wants to dissolve the parliament, they must come with a no confidence motion. And even with the no confidence motion, president still can't dissolve even if he lose the no confidence motion, president cannot dissolve the parliament. 50% of the parliamentary majority must resolve a resolution and request the president to dissolve the parliament. Then only a new election could be held prior to 2.5 years. So that is how we are right now. And then the asking president to resign, I mean, I don't know how fair that for a president who had been elected for 5 years, 2.5 years have gone now, 2.5 years to go. Even if the president, say, steps down, then power goes back to the parliament again. The prime minister will be the caretaker, and in the meantime there will be election within the parliament. So somebody from the parliament again becomes the president for the rest of the term. So in terms of the constitution, you can't have an election immediate. So these are complex legal issues and constitutional issues, which I don't think most of the protesters understand that, and protesters seems to be leaderless.
The government calls for a national government. These calls went unheeded. What do you think is the reason for this?
I really don't know. Who had take it. The road ahead is very, very difficult and challenging. Some very difficult decisions need to be taken. Leave aside the taking over the government. No one wants to take the Ministry of the Finance, because that difficult is the job. But that doesn't mean that you just run away from a challenge. You know, if you say now in Sinhala you say the famous pala we all know. In Sinhala you say yuddheta nathi kaduwa koskotannada. So that means that whatever the strength you have, if you don't use it in time of a war or in time of a challenge or in time of a need, what's the point of having that? So this is the time for these experts to come in, because anybody to come and even say the protesters to come and run economy at least to be salvaged. You know, I understand that we have gone for a technical default, yes, but that's not the end of the road. Several other countries have gone through.
The reason previous Sri Lankan IMF programs have failed is because the government had ignored the importance of the right institutional setup, namely the right values, ethos and moral behavior in the country. This is what former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. W. Vijayawardena, explained at a webinar held earlier this week that looked to examine the country's economy, political situation and dissent. He added that what Sri Lanka needs from here on are real sector reforms, such as a corruption-free society, rule of law and an independent judiciary.
Speaking at a webinar organized by Youth Movement #Generation this week, titled Politics, Economics and Dissent, Where Do We Go From Here?, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, W.A. Vijayawardena, explained why previous Sri Lankan IMF programs have failed.
If you look at Sri Lanka's economy today, the economic situation is no secret to anyone of us. The country has been bankrupt. Now, if we plan to go from here forward, we'll have to keep in our mind seeking funds from the International Monetary Fund, as well as restructuring the existing foreign debt will not solve our problem. That is because there's a fundamental difference between the financial sector and the real sector of the economy. The financial sector is simply an imagination in our mind. It doesn't actually has a real existence. It is the real sector which should actually provide benefits and the welfare for us. For example, we cannot eat a 5,000 rupee note, but we can eat the rice that we can buy by using the 5,000 rupee note. So in the past, Sri Lanka has gone to the International Monetary Fund on 16 occasions. On 9 occasions, Sri Lanka has completed the program, and 6 occasions Sri Lanka has defaulted its program. In the past, what happened was all the governments which had sought the IMF support had stopped at getting funds from the IMF and overcoming the balance of payments problem at that particular point of time. And also, the government had ignored the fact that Sri Lanka will have to go for this real sector reform in order to develop the country. Now, when it comes to the institutional setup, many people think that institutions are simply the organizations, but in economics, institutions are simply values and ethos of a society. And we must have the conducive ethos, conducive values, and conducive moral behavior for all Sri Lankans to behave. And why Sri Lanka has remained a developing country throughout this period, irrespective of the massive investments the government and all other individuals have made during that period, mainly because Sri Lanka has not done anything to improve the institutional setup. So what it means is that the value system in Sri Lanka will have to change, and that value system will be a corruption-free society where the rule of law will be observed, everybody will be under the same law, and at the same time, the law and order should be maintained without fear or favor, and the judiciary should be independent. And most important factor is the people whom we elect to parliament should be of absolutely high, unquestionable moral character. Now, that is the institutional setup that we have to set up in Sri Lanka. After we have this ground situation cleared, what is necessary for Sri Lanka to do is to have a proper plan to take Sri Lanka forward. And that particular plan should necessarily be one which involves the introduction of high technology to Sri Lanka's production system and thereby improve the productivity in Sri Lanka.
And we'll be back with more local stories right after this short commercial break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, national carrier Sri Lankan Airlines has issued a clarification on the contents of 3 chartered flights that carried 102 tons of material to the Entebbe airport in Uganda in February last year. In a social media post, Sri Lankan says that the contents were cash that was ordered from a currency printing company located in Sri Lanka.
Social media posts have questioned the contents of 3 Sri Lankan Airlines flights that departed to Entebbe airport in Uganda in February 2021. According to the flight manifest, the cargo consisted of up to 102 tons of printed material. However, a local media outlet had posed questions to the airline on the 18th of April last year in attempts to confirm what exactly the printed material was. According to the newspaper report, Sri Lankan Airlines was issued a request under the Freedom of Information Act. However, citing its inability to disclose confidential information relating to a commercial transaction between the airline and a customer, no such information had been provided. Meanwhile, foreign media reports have shown an abnormal rise in Uganda's foreign exchange reserves during the period when the flights arrived. According to reports, Uganda's foreign exchange reserves had increased from $1.548 billion in the first quarter of 2021 to $4.418 billion in September 2021. However, some foreign media outlets have reported that this situation may have been due to Uganda having taken advantage of its IMF special drawing rights. However, there were various comments on social media regarding what was actually carried on the 3 planes. Some have alleged that the 3 planes have flown to Uganda carrying money belonging to some powerful individuals in Sri Lanka. In the meantime, after close to a year since the request for information was made, in a statement issued on the 14th of April, Sri Lankan Airlines said that it received an air cargo order to transport approximately 102 tons of printed material from Colombo to Entebbe International Airport in Uganda in February 2021. It noted that the consignment was purely commercial in nature and brought in much-needed foreign revenue to the airline and the country at the time. The national carrier went on to emphasize that the cargo order was undertaken purely for commercial purposes. Sri Lankan Airlines later tweeted that the Ugandan government had ordered a consignment of banknotes from a global banknote printing company located in Sri Lanka. According to a Sri Lankan Airlines social media post, the banknotes printed by the company in Sri Lanka were transported to Uganda. In the meantime, the plot seems to have thickened, with Uganda's financial industry currently at risk of being blacklisted by international systems for failure to put in place measures that can effectively prevent financial crimes like money laundering. This is a requirement by the Financial Action Task Force, a global intergovernmental organization on the initiative of the G7 countries to develop policies to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. Uganda was put on the grey list, a list that shows the performance of countries regarding the safety or level of risk of their financial systems. This came about after the FATF declined to adopt Uganda's money laundering and terror financing risk assessment report done by its Ministry of Finance, the Financial Intelligence Authority, and some non-governmental organizations in 2018.
Meanwhile, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has restricted the dispensing of fuel for vehicles with effect from today, slapping limits for most vehicles except for buses, trucks and commercial vehicles. Meanwhile, Litrogas chairman Teshara Jayasinghe has decided to step down from his position, citing a lack of support from the Finance Ministry to solve the gas crisis.
2 tankers carrying 40,000 metric tons of diesel and 37,500 metric tons of petrol arrived last night and today after payments were made under the Indian line of credit. According to the chairman of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Sumit Vijayasinghe, however, Sri Lanka will finish using $400 million from the $500 million credit line by the end of April, with the prediction that the facility will end by the second week of May. With that being the case, negotiations for a second credit line are underway, which is expected to help Sri Lanka sustain itself for another 2-month period. In this backdrop, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has issued new restrictions on the pumping of fuel to vehicles with effect from 1 p.m. today. Accordingly, filling stations will only be permitted to pump 1,000 rupees worth of fuel for motorcycles at a single time. For 3-wheelers, the limit has been set at 1,500 rupees of fuel. For cars, vans and SUVs, the maximum amount of fuel pumped will be 5,000 rupees worth. However, the CPC says that these restrictions will not apply to buses, trucks and tractors used for commercial purposes. Meanwhile, with regards to the filling of fuel in cans, the corporation says that fuel will only be issued to individuals who can prove that they are engaged in agricultural production or industrial activities. Documentation approved by a divisional secretariat or Grama Niladhari mentioning the purpose will need to be furnished. Meanwhile, chairman of Litrogas Lanka Limited, Teshara Jayasinghe, has decided to step down from his position. In a letter to the President yesterday, Jayasinghe has said that since his appointment on the 6th of July 2021, he had not received sufficient support from the then Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa, under whose purview LP gas comes under. He stated that he was unable to solve the ongoing gas crisis in the country by himself and states that he needs the contribution of all economic experts in the country. He added that steps have been taken by him to import LP gas from India under credit in order to maintain gas supplies in the market for a period of time, and requested the President to intervene and ensure that it happens accordingly. In the meantime, as to the country's power cut situation, there will be 2 hours and 15-minute power cuts this weekend. However, the Public Utilities Commission says that power cuts over the weekend will only take place before 6 p.m.
Now, another naval operation in the seas of Delft Island has uncovered up to 150 kilograms of Kerala cannabis after it was jettisoned by a dinghy during an attempted escape from the Sri Lankan Navy. 3 suspects were arrested during the operation and handed over to the Talemana police.
A special operation was conducted by the Northern Naval Command of the Sri Lankan Navy in the seas of Delft Island in Jaffna on Wednesday the 13th of April. During the operation, the Navy vessel spotted a suspicious dinghy that attempted to escape by jettisoning some sacks when it was about to be searched. However, the Navy was able to intercept the dinghy and arrest 3 suspects on board. Further, a subsequent search in the sea areas uncovered about 150 kilograms of Kerala cannabis thrown overboard in 68 packages that were stuffed into 4 sacks. According to the Navy, the street value of the seized Kerala cannabis stock is believed to be around 45 million rupees. The suspects arrested, aged between 22 and 49 years of age, were residents of Pesale and Mana. The suspects, the stock of cannabis along with the dinghy, were then handed over to the Talemana police for further investigations. The seizure came hours after the seizure of over 300 kilograms of heroin and over 9 kilograms of crystal methamphetamine during a special operation in the seas of Dodandua in Gaul.
Today, Christians across the world observe Good Friday, the day that Christ the Saviour was crucified and died on the cross. Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, in his Good Friday sermon today, called on the faithful to practice the Lenten observance of letting go of attachments or risk the ruin of not only ourselves but those around us as well.
Good Friday is the day that Jesus Christ, the Saviour of the world, was crucified and died at Calvary. It is observed during Holy Week in the last week of Lent as part of the Paschal Triduum. On Good Friday, Christians mark the solemn day when the Son of God sacrificed his life to redeem mankind from sin. And today also marks the last day of fasting and sacrifice in the season of Lent. Holy Week culminates on Easter Sunday, which marks the resurrection of Lord Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, today, Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, presided over Good Friday service at St. Lucia's Cathedral in Cartagena.
Kristus වහන්සේ අපිට කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? අත්හරින්න. අත්හරින්න. නිත්‍යානුකූලව අප සතු විය හැකි හැම දෙයින්ම නිදහස් වෙන්න කියලා. වැඩිම වුණොත් අවුරුදු 100ක් ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. ඒ සියල්ලම අත්හැරලා දාලා හතර රියන් කොටුවට යන්නට ඕනේ අපි හැමෝම. එහෙමනම් අපි මොනවටද මේ ලෝකේ මේ සම්පත් මේ වස්තුව මේ බලය තණ්හාවෙන් අල්ලගෙන ඒවා අතහරින්න නැතුව අපේ ජීවිතයත් කාලකන්ණි කරගෙන අනුන්ගේ ජීවිතයත් කාලකන්ණි කරන්නට කටයුතු කරන්නේ ඇයි?
Welcome back. Russia's offensive in Ukraine has led to the elimination of a large number of Ukrainian military facilities using high-tech missile systems. Russian forces have used high-precision missiles to eliminate 12 Ukrainian facilities, while 48 more facilities were eliminated by its combat aircraft, its Ministry of Defense says.
The Russian Defense Ministry stated that its forces have eliminated 12 Ukrainian facilities with high-precision missiles, including 2 missile and artillery depots overnight since yesterday. The Russian missile and artillery troops eliminated 770 Ukrainian military facilities, including 9 command posts and an S-300 anti-aircraft missile system, it added. Russian combat aircraft delivered strikes against 48 Ukrainian military facilities overnight, including a radar station, 2 positions of multiple rocket launchers, and an artillery battery. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, another 134 Ukrainian servicemen, including 14 officers, surrendered in the city of Mariupol. This means a total of 1,160 soldiers from Ukraine's 36th Marine Brigade, including 176 officers, have laid down their arms. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said on the day that the whole country was still facing the threat of missile strikes as Russian offensives continued in Kharkov and other regions, and the fighting in Mariupol was still going on. In addition, he said that forced mobilization measures are being carried out in Donetsk and Luhansk. Further, Russian troops had struck a military target on the edge of Kiev overnight with cruise missiles, and its defense ministry promised more strikes against the Ukrainian capital in response to Ukrainian attacks on Russian targets. The ministry said its forces had also taken full control of the Ilyich steel plant in the besieged port city of Mariupol, which has been encircled by Russian troops for weeks. Powerful explosions were heard in Kiev yesterday, which appeared to be among the most significant since the Russian troops pulled back from the area earlier this month in preparations for battles in the south and the east.
And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.